Welcome to the Moynihan Report here on the Two-Way Network. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan. Today, we are joined by journalism educator, and media critic, Jeff Jarvis. Jeff's most recent book is called The Web We Weave, Why We Must Reclaim the Internet from Moguls, Misanthropes, and Moral Panic. I think I'm not a mogul, I am a misanthrope, but I'm liable for some moral panics. But Jeff also had, we were just talking about this, I want to make sure to mention it, a lot of AI podcasts. He's got like 7 AI podcasts. Jeff, how many AI podcasts do you actually have? 2. Why do you need 2?
One was called This Week in Google, and then on the Twit network, This Week in Tech, and advertisers were no longer interested in buying ads on a podcast about Google, and so we just changed the name to Intelligent Machines. And then I'm on another one, which is just about AI, called AI Inside.
And to go from AI on one end back to the amazing fact that you were the founder and creator of Entertainment Weekly.
I was.
In what year?
91.
91.
I wrote the original memo for it. I was TV critic at People, and it was a moment where I saw that we had all this new choice. We had these newfangled things, cable TV and VCRs with flashing 12s and all this stuff. So I came up with the idea for it, and it was immediately turned down by Time Inc. management. Henry Grunwald, then the editor of Time Inc., said, "People who watch television do not read." And it gathered dust for 6 years, and then a new editor came in, and they decided to start it. Yeah.
And it lasted a good...
It went out of print about 2 years ago. I wrote a little magazine called Magazine, a little book called Magazine about the magazines, and I finally told the story of Entertainment Weekly's launch, which was a rather tortured experience.
So tell us where we are now. I mean, we were talking before we started about some of the interviews I was listening that you gave recently about this book. A lot of gloomy people out there. Look, magazines are dying. It's hard to make money. I mean, newspapers used to be enormously profitable. They're not anymore. Local news is dying. You can sustain this argument for a very long time and say, God, the sky is falling and disaster is afoot. You're far more optimistic.
In general, that doesn't mean that there aren't dark clouds overhead.
Of course.
That doesn't mean people aren't screwing things up, Lord knows.
Yes.
But yeah, I celebrate the fact that mass media are dying. I celebrate the fact that now people who always had a voice and couldn't be heard can now be heard. And I think that matters most when you see things like Black Lives Matter, which is still not against the law in this country, and Black Twitter, and communities that can now gather online who couldn't have access before to media. When Walter Cronkite said back in the day, and that's the way it is, for many Americans, it wasn't the way it was. They weren't represented. People who looked like us, we were represented. We were visible on television, but a lot of people were not. And I think that the internet, first and foremost, enables communities to speak, to be heard, to gather, to act, and I celebrate that.
There is the argument, I mean, this is not my argument because I don't share this belief, but I run up against it quite frequently, is that those people might be able to get together and, there's no barrier to entry, there's no enormous cost associated with starting the Chicago Defenders, some of these black newspapers that were very popular in major cities. But, David Irving, the Holocaust deniers, the David Dukes, they used to have these small newsletters, and you had to be really in that circle. To know about it, you had to pay for it, and it was sent to you once a month or, once every couple of months. Now it's a click away, and it's just destroying everybody. This is why we have so much nonsense on Twitter. I mean, I want to talk to you about you staying on Twitter too, because it's obviously politically not your universe, but there's a lot of dreck in there. And is it just that we're seeing it now because of the technology, or are we exposing people to ideas that they wouldn't have been exposed to in creating this kind of these, whether it be alt-right or whatever it might be?
There's more chaff, but there's also more wheat, and it's been ever thus. My prior book was called, sorry for the plugs here, but you got to sell.
Yeah, it's fine with me, yeah.
Called The Gutenberg Parenthesis, which looks at the entirety of the history of print. And when print came out, it was not trusted as a medium.
Yeah.
Because anybody could make a pamphlet, like anybody can make a Facebook post or a tweet. And what was trusted was word of mouth. What was trusted was the people you knew. And the first reported call for censorship of print came in 1470, about 15 years after Gutenberg's Bible, when Niccolo Perotti, a translator who was much offended by a shoddy edition of Pliny, wrote to the Pope and said, something must be done. You must approve everything that comes off this press. And I realized that he wasn't seeking censorship at all. He was anticipating the creation of the institutions of editing and publishing, which would assure some measure of quality and authority and artistry in print for half a millennium. Now, my theory is that we have a scale of speech that those institutions just can't handle. We're going to have to invent new institutions to find quality and artistry. Is there crap? Yes. The original days of print created Malleus Maleficarum, which led to witch hunts and was a manual for it. There's always been crap in public discourse. We need the institutions that help us find the good stuff.
I want to ask you about this quote. This is from 2022, I think, on a Medium post of yours, which I found pretty interesting. And you asked the question, what if we concede that the battle against bad speech is lost? Disinformation and lies will exist no matter what we do. Those who want such speech will always be able to say it and find it. That is just realism. Look, when Facebook asked you to come over and, how do we combat misinformation? You talk to them. I don't know. You didn't work for them.
No.
You was just kind of.
But right after the 2016 election, both Facebook and Google were going to anybody they could get to say, what do we do?
Yeah, what do we do? You now say that misinformation is missing the point in a way, right? Tell me a little bit about that, because I think you were pretty strongly opposed to this stuff before.
Well, sure, and I'm opposed to misinformation. I raised a bucket load of money from the likes of Facebook and others to try to combat it, funding studies and research and fact-checking and such. But I think in the end, that's the wrong way to go. I just read a thing in Der Spiegel, and my German's not so good, but Google Translate helps, which was fascinating because the AfD, the far-right party there, has now been labeled officially an extremist party. The journalists are saying, well, how do we cover this? What do we do? And Der Spiegel cited a Portuguese academic who just written a paper saying that people are not radicalized. They're not convinced. These thoughts are in their head anyway. They just didn't come out because there were norms against them, and people weren't likely to talk about these things. But what happened? Some event, maybe it was migrants in Europe, maybe it was 9/11, is a triggering event, and people will say those things they thought and dared not say. And politicians who weren't going to run on these things because they never heard it are now hearing it, and they run on it, and they win. And what this argued is that it's norms we have to deal with. It's not information and disinformation. It's norms. And I try to push journalists all the time to reread Hannah Arendt, or read it in the first place, and Origins of Totalitarianism, because she tells us that both in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, people were alienated from their communities and society. They became lonely and vulnerable to the siren call of the authoritarian. And that's where I think we are today. And I'm not sure what we do about it. I'm not sure how we go back to norms that says certain speech is unacceptable.
But the idea of protecting people from that speech and saying that if we put, some bubble wrap around everybody, they won't be infected by this. They won't be voting for AfD in Germany. I mean, a good example is I used to live in Sweden, and there was this cordon sanitaire around the media in talking about the Sweden Democrats. We're not going to discuss them. So what happened in the age of the internet? A completely separate ecosystem of media developed, became very popular, and they are now the second biggest party in the country. There was a time when they were just neck and neck with the biggest party in the country, and the government coming in said, okay, look, we're going to have to do something with them in some sort of coalition. We can't ignore the fact that the people are on the side of these guys. In shutting them off from the media didn't work.
Right, and there's an argument going back to Areopagitica that says that if people don't test this in their own minds, if they aren't tested by disinformation, then they are more vulnerable to it.
Talk to me about this. I mean, I heard you in an interview recently, and I was driving, and I started chuckling, and I said, oh, that's why I stopped tweeting. You said, I can be an asshole on, it was the word that you used. I can be an asshole on Twitter. It makes me kind of angry and punchy and the rest of it. The thing about some of the, I don't want to say radicalization, because I know people who, voted for Donald Trump, who I don't believe to be radical. They said I didn't vote for him. I've had 3 opportunities. I didn't, and I never would. But I wouldn't say that they were radical, but they were alienated from so many things, and one of the big ones was media. was this idea that you turn on the television at night and you used to be able to get Conan and Jay Leno and David Letterman, and now you have a series of hosts who seem like they're just doing political shows. I mean, what do you make of that idea from the right? And I know you're a man of the left, that they say, like, look, I'm alienated in a way from Hollywood, from my values are not represented, people don't understand them, and they kind of spit on them.
I'm dubious because there's a hell of a lot of media now for the right, starting with Rupert Murdoch and the Empire, starting with much of what's online. The right is well represented.
Is that where it started, though? Is that where the Fox News started? Saying, you guys always had ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, but now something from our side.
You had talk radio,
Yeah.
Which I think was important. And then you had Murdoch and Fox. And then you have the internet filled with things that represent people's views.
Yeah.
The paradox here, and this, when I go on CNN and face a conservative, this gets me a laugh every time. It's the left that's now alienated. The New York Times and the Washington Post are failing, in my view. I use the hashtags Broken Times and Broken Post because they're frightened of alienating the readers they think stupidly they can get back or that they ever had in the first place from the right. And in trying to kowtow to them, they only piss off the left. They piss off their last liberal, loyal readers. And we're stuck in this case where there actually isn't much liberal media in America now when it comes to anything mainstream because they're frightened. CNN, Post, Times are all frightened, I think. And so the left, like the right, finds its home instead on the internet.
Do you worry? I mean, I mentioned this before. I mean, you're one of the few people, of the left that remains on Twitter. I mean, there are some people, but not a lot. I mean, people went to Blue Sky, right?
Yep.
Mastodon a little bit. There's a few other alternatives. Do you worry in a way that, everyone's retreating to their corners and existing in ideological echo chambers? The right is watching. I mean, they don't even watch Fox News. I was covering Trump stuff for the last, not this election, the previous two, and there were places I would go where they wouldn't allow Fox in the room. It had to be Newsmax or OAN. I mean, Newsmax was even probably a bit soft for a lot of these people. And it's just they didn't want to hear. And I mean, the question was always, and I think they learned a lot of this from Trump. It's like that old drug ad. I learned it from watching You, Dad. Was like, where are you from? And Trump does this when he has the media in front of him.
Right.
Where are you from? Because that's going to determine how I answer.
You're the lying blank.
Correct. And, Lügenpresse kind of stuff. But I worry about that, not from any particular ideological disposition, but just like, is it great that everyone is getting their media from very, very particular, ideological echo chambers?
The exception in history, I think, was the age of mass media, which was from the moment of television until the 90s. It lasted only about 40 years. If you go back to 1900, in New York City, where we are, there were 46 daily newspapers.
Yes.
Daily.
Dailies.
And they represented all kinds of communities. And as they consolidated and as publishers tended to buy them up and they became fewer, they divvied up the classes of New York. But each class had its organs.
Yeah.
It had something that represented them and spoke for them and listened to them, and they felt represented. In the time of monolithic mass media, I think people didn't feel that they were represented, or those who were represented were a minority and other people were left out. So this is why I celebrate the end of mass media. I think it's about time. In the Gutenberg parenthesis, I talk about media itself as an exception in history. If you go back before print, society was conversational. Public discourse was how we established ourselves as a society. Print came along, and I celebrate that, and changed it pretty radically. But until the mechanization and industrialization of print in the mid-19th century, the average circulation of a daily newspaper in the United States is 4,000. It was a Substack newsletter. And that was the scale of media, because how many times could you pull the press in a day? How far could the horse carry it? That was how fast could you set the type? Along come the steam-powered press, stereotyping, and the linotype, the subject of my next book, and suddenly you now have the opportunity to increase audience to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions. You also have the opportunity to radically expand the content. Newspapers became fatter. Magazines existed as a new business model. We had a great grand explosion of new media. Now, what changed that, I think, was in 1893, a guy named Frank Munsey, who by all accounts was an ass, who started a magazine called Muncie's, because he was also an egotist, was failing at selling his magazine at 25 or 35 cents a copy. He decided one day to sell it at 10 cents, to lose money on it, because his competition was a Sunday paper, which was selling for a nickel. And he realized he was going to lose money on every copy. How would he make it up? Advertising. And there is the beginning of the attention economy that ruled mass media for a century and that infected, in my view, the internet. I'm a capitalist. I'm not against capitalism, but the attention economy of clickbait and crap and just trying to come up with more content for more content for more content is what has, I think, ruined the internet to a great extent.
But it's something that's been there for as
long
long
time.
as there have been media. I mean, I remember when I first went to the United Kingdom in the 90s, and I was so excited because I could buy every paper. I'd buy the the Guardian, the Independent, the Telegraph, the Times, and it's from across the. And then there were the papers, and I said, why are there naked women in these papers? There's one called the Daily Sport, which had no sports in it. It was just like naked girls. Like, oh, they're selling newspapers. Like that's exactly what that rail on the Daily Mail website is like you get scantily clad people. So this is an old, kind of boring and time-tested technique. So nothing surprising about it.
Not at all. And I think that it can be healthy if people can create their own media, not just content, but also conversation, discourse, community. I think if we return to the idea that we can have a conversation, we are out of practice from that conversation. We are crappy at it as a society. No question about that. But I think that that's the only solution we can have is to find ourselves back in conversation.
You know, I was talking to producer Jason about this, and I said, you know, Jarvis's book and how he's been talking about this recently, I don't know if I use these exact words, but this is essentially what I was saying. There's so much that I could put you in a room with a conservative and you would agree on all this. I know your politics, on day-to-day politics about the Trump administration, about what's best for the country from economic policy, whatever it might be, is obviously very different. But when you talk about stuff like this, you know, don't trust the institutions necessarily. They've been failing us. You know, do an end run around them. We're going to make our own media. This is great. Misinformation is out there, but it exists, and we fight it in a more traditional way. It sounds like a lot of people on the right, you know, from say, beginning of COVID, during COVID, even before that.
So at the last minute, when I was editing the galleys for the Gutenberg parenthesis, I snuck in a paragraph when something just finally occurred to me. And I'd been reading Robert Nisbet, conservative, and I came to an odd conclusion that we're in a paradoxical reversal right now, where conservatives used to be there to protect institutions.
No, burn them down now.
Exactly, to resist change. Progressives were there to change the institutions, to make them progress. And we are at the opposite right now, where the conservatives are the ones who are trying to destroy the institutions, and the liberals are the ones who find themselves in the position of having to defend them. And I think the best defense of them is to have them change, is to update them. But we're in a topsy-turvy world. What the hell does the word conservative mean anymore? It is a meaningless word.
What do you think it means now?
What it means now? It now means Trumpism, full stop. And that's whatever he wants. And it's destruction for destruction's sake, and it's anger for anger's sake. And it's the norms of what we would have done be gone. And so I don't know how we try to recapture what we had. Were we fooling ourselves for those times of mass media when we only had a blinkered view of what society was? Maybe that is the case, and maybe we have to figure out a whole new reality.
I mean, one of the things you talk about things that have been in our history for as long as we can remember, just look back at history. One of those things globally, and particularly in Europe, has been populism. And we have had our moments, right? Yep. We have the Huey Long moments, we have the Pat Buchanan moments, the Ross Perot moments, but they're little blips that, you know, Perot, you know, was a pretty serious blip. Buchanan, but nobody saw this coming. We've been kind of immune from both populism and socialism as large-scale political movements in America. What changed? It's not as if, you know, what happens in Europe? Well, 2015 migrant crisis. You can kind of pick that. You know, in France, it's a lot earlier. Yep. But that's the Algeria situation, et cetera. But there's not a huge moment in America that it seems to me. What do you make of this? And I know you write a lot about it, and we should get into that a little bit. what do you make of this moment and where it came from? Did it kind of sneak up on you? It did on me.
Yes, it did. The volume of it, the severity of it, it did absolutely. I have to go back. I'm of an age when I can remember things. I'm older than you are. Nixon and the Southern strategy. I think it was a case where the Republicans said we're going to lose. Johnson is vulnerable because he signed the Civil Rights Act, and that's where this flip came in. And I think it's a mistake. And here we are, two white guys talking about this, so I want to be cautious here. But I think we cannot analyze this without race. And I think that it starts, to my mind, well, it goes back, obviously, 400 years, but it goes back in modern times, I think, to Nixon and the Southern strategy. And a slow flip that occurs there in terms of who represents what and whom. And today, obviously, Trump and company are making a big deal about race and trying to argue that it's the white people who are put upon, and ending every possible accommodation for people who have not found accommodation in the history of this country. And that's where we are now. But we don't dare talk about that.
But it's so many, I mean, if you look at the movement, I mean, it's most prominent amongst Hispanics, but also black men too, migrating towards Donald Trump and not away from Donald Trump. What does that mean if it's mostly about race? I
go back to Hannah Arendt, who says that when people are alienated from society, from their communities and from society, and Hispanic people can be and black people can be, they tend to latch on to abstract notions. And the better example to start with, I think, is abortion and guns. I don't believe that right Americans think that the most important thing in their daily lives is abortion and guns. It's an abstract notion that you can get behind. It's a signal. Similarly, when people were out there saying noxiously that people in Springfield, Ohio were eating cats and dogs, they didn't believe that. I think part of the problem is we say, well, look what they told the pollsters, look what they told the journalists. Oh my God, they believe this. What's happened to education? What's happened to the country? It's a signal. It's a loyalty test. If I'm willing to say that, then I belong to something. And this is what I belong to. And I think people are indeed angry and alienated and frustrated in all kinds of ways. And so they are then vulnerable to that siren call, as I say, of the populist.
Did we make a mistake with race by sort of boiling it down to these essential components that I don't think that so many people that were talking about it really understood, particularly when it came to Hispanics? There's a great variation
Absolutely.
between people. I mean, I did a lot of reporting with people that were just really big Trump fans. And I would say, like, you're a migrant or your parents were, they're like, yeah, but this is crazy. Like, and it's like they had no loyalty to this idea of being Hispanic. And, there was that survey that came out of, 95% of Hispanics had never heard the word Latinx or would never use it. And, that produced a lot of chuckles. But for me, it was like, we're out of touch. And we're talking in a sort of academic language and talking about people as if they are one undifferentiated mass. And they have very different ideas about a lot of different things.
Years ago, I was a Sunday editor of the Daily News here in New York, and I couldn't keep a job. And I remember the marketing director there lecturing. Everyone knew who came into the paper and said, don't you dare talk about Hispanics as if they are one community. They are not. It's many diasporas, many communities, many cultural views. Same with Black America. It's not a black community. That's ridiculous. And when we try to put people into those external definitions is when we get in trouble. Mass is one of them. I think we started with mass media and mass marketing, just trying to advertise to everybody. Mm-hmm. But then that wasn't efficient. And so we invented demographics and psychographics. And we put people into labels that were not their own. They were imposed upon them. And Hispanic is one of them. My students who come from countries in South America also had never been referred to as Hispanic before. Yeah. That was an invention here to lump people together.
A lot of whom are white too. I mean,
that's a whole other question. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you could say you're Hispanic and your father can be the ambassador from Argentina whose parents were from Europe and from Spain. What do you think that the mistakes? I mean, I've heard you talk a lot, both on social media and the writing you've done about the right, which is obviously what alarms you right now. It's what's going on in D.C. Do you look at the left, I mean, your comrades on the same side, and
Fellow
say,
travelers.
this is what you did wrong. This is what we did wrong. Because, everyone's talking right now. What's happened to the Democratic Party? What are they going to do? We're not hearing anything from them. I'm looking for the autopsy to say, okay, we can say that, the right was very good at exploiting culture war issues, for instance. What did the left, not what they should do in the future, what did they do wrong in the recent past?
I'll play your game, but object to it to this extent. I think we do have to look forward.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying one is
Right,
the
no,
other.
no.
But yes, but if you were to look back,
but
so you don't have to repeat those mistakes for the future, what would those be?
I'm not sure that there's a simple formula. I was a Kamala Harris fan from 2016. I got to pull my hat and my hoodie back out in this
Really?
election. Oh, yes.
Wow.
I was for her first, and it was impressed with her for a long time. And I think we have to grapple again with the fact that she was a black Indian woman, and this country was incapable of electing that person at this time. And that's
Do you think
not
that was
her
the
fault.
main reason she didn't get elected?
Well, she had a 100-day campaign. There were all kinds of reasons. I think she was attacked unfairly. I think her campaign wasn't perfect. We could dissect all of that. But I think we have to deal with race and gender foremost. But that doesn't help us much, right? Are we ever going to, can we imagine Pete Buttigieg being elected to the White House? Is this country ready for a gay man with children? I don't know. How do we parse the various prejudices of the population as a whole? Now, I'm here all the time saying mass is dead. There is no mass. Mass is an insult. The one time we need a mass is to elect a president. The one time you need to put people together into a coalition then. So there was a lot of talk about the Obama coalition and how it fell apart. We're not good at coalition building, I think. I think that's a huge problem that we have.
But Obama, how did that happen then? We have a black president who's elected for 2 terms and being up against, a lot of conservative media that basically said he was a Maoist and he was a Muslim and he was not even born in the United States. I mean, there's a lot of crap being thrown at him, and I'm keeping this separate from, policy differences. How does that happen in the number of people that we've seen, and we know this for a fact, that went from voting for Obama to voting for Donald Trump?
I think it was a different time. I think the norms, again, were different. I think the Overton window was
You think we got more racist?
closed. Yeah, well, no, you could say it. You were allowed to say it. That's what Donald Trump has done more than anything else. I can say these obnoxious things, and so can you now. You're welcome.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we stand. So we got other problems in the Democratic Party. I think right now a lot of attention being on age, and I'm not sure that David Hogg's strategy of trying to go after everybody if they're over a certain age is necessarily going to be productive, but he's right to the extent that the party is too old. They're dying in office. We have 3 vacant seats in the House. That's a huge problem. I think that the populace as a whole looks at the Democratic Party and doesn't see exciting people. And then we see some people in the party. I mean, this week I'm mad about people thinking that Rahm Emanuel is anybody to follow. He should go to an island with Fetterman and now with Newsom. And they're trying too hard to go to the so-called center, the mythical center that doesn't exist. And they're trying to call us woke, and they're buying into the framework of the right. That's the wrong thing to do. We have to have a positive message, a positive vision, a positive framework of what we're going to do. The person who impresses me more than anybody else right now is AOC. She's turned into a very mature, smart politician, and the party's not treating her well, and that's not smart. Look what she and Bernie
Do you think they're not treating her well because the idea in the mainstream Democratic Party is she's too left
Yeah,
for
probably.
us to win
Yeah,
an
I think so.
election?
I think
You
so.
disagree with that, I presume?
No, I think that's what they think.
Yeah.
But I don't think she is now. I think she's shown herself to be a mature stateswoman, and she's done the right things at the right moment for the bigger vision. And I think that she would do that. Now, whether she's a presidential timber at this point, I'm not suggesting that, but the party was foolish to put, not to speak ill of the recently dead, a dying man into the role that she could have enlivened in a time of great ethical crisis in Congress. She's the one who should have been there.
You mentioned David Hogg and age. You're a media critic. You've been writing about this. You're a journalism professor.
I'm also old.
You're also old. You said it. I didn't say that.
It ain't
Look that up.
prematurely
Can we
gray.
check and see if he's old? I think he's faking it with this gray hair. The last couple of weeks, we've seen a news cycle that was about journalism, about how journalism responded to Joe Biden's age and health, and this Jake Tapper book with Alex Thompson. You rolled your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I take it that you're not a fan of the book, or you're not a fan of the discourse. What is it that bugs you?
The discourse. I haven't bought the book, and I don't plan to. I used to know a journalist named Jake Tapper. I think that this book is rather shameful and not
think
totally
it's
productive.
shameful?
Yeah, I do.
Why?
Because I think the problem in this country right now is in the White House. And to keep going back and kicking Joe Biden out of the bus is not terribly informative. And I don't think that, I think a lot of the reporting is being questioned right now.
But you don't think that reporting should have been done in the first place because there's a greater threat in the White House?
Pretty much, yes.
Really?
Yeah. You can always report, you can always do it. But for
But you have
Tapper
people that are
and
just
Thompson-
coming off a campaign who are very eager to talk and say, I didn't want to say this during the campaign. This is according to Tapper and Thompson, because we wanted to win and we didn't want to this. But now that pressure
also finding blame. They were in charge of the campaign and they were trying to find somebody else to blame
that's
for their loss.
Yeah, that's politics.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there aren't issues there, okay, but that's not what should be foremost in our mind. And Tapper and company are out there hawking the book, and television is helping them do it. And I don't think it's very productive.
But so what would you say looking backwards now? Should we stop looking backwards at all?
No, of course not. Of course not.
I'm particularly about Biden and about the Democratic Party and about how they handled this issue, because I think that does help to explain how we got here, right? That the Biden, there were a lot of people that were pretty annoyed by that, particularly after the debate, and then the switcheroo, and there's no open primary. There was a lot of annoyance about that stuff.
You're not going to win an election with a hair shirt on. So again, to go to Rahm Emanuel and John Fetterman and Newsom, they're all trying to complain about the party and throw darts at the own party as if that's going to somehow win an election. That's not going to do it. That's not what got the crowds out from AOC and Bernie. They got the crowds out because they said, we're going to fight for you, and we understand where you are, and we're empathetic with it, and we're going to come up with something that helps you. That's the only thing you can do in politics ever. So yeah,
they also had the idea that nobody else had. I mean, they're on the road. Nobody else in the
Exactly.
Democratic Party is on the road.
Exactly.
I mean, I give them credit. I interviewed AOC the day that she won, and beat Joe Crowley, and that was somebody who was very green and she looked taken aback. It was the last interview of the day, and it was in Midtown Manhattan. And the person I see, and I disagree with her on a lot of issues. I see at the other end of this somebody who's a totally different politician. You would expect that learning in office, but she's quite mature. And I think if the Republican Party wants to, worry about a candidate, that's the one, not Gavin Newsom. I don't think.
Yeah, and our problem in the Democratic Party is leadership. We're not hearing it right now. The midterms are going to come up faster than we know. There aren't people who are organizing, besides the two of them, are not organizing from the top events out there. I don't think we see the real talent that is going to come out. There are good people, no question about that. But
what a Bernie type figure. I mean, Bernie has an ability. I mean, AOC, I'm sure she could bring a lot of people to the stadium, but a lot of people come to see Bernie. He's like an electrifying speaker in his way. Is he just because he's too old, basically?
Sure he is. Yeah, especially after what we've just gone through. And Bernie bros drove me nuts in the day because they could be difficult. In their way.
To you personally, or just in general?
Just both.
Yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah. But is your idea for the party is just to be really sort of boringly and overly simplistic about it? It is to pull it to the left in a way, and away from the sort of center of the party, right?
Yes, I think that's the way we've got to go. This mythical center is not going to work. This idea that we can, if we just tweak things, we're going to pull back Trump voters. I don't think on that basis, on that notion of this fake scale. It doesn't work. And again, I go back to coalition politics, and I go back to the media picture that we had before television, where I think you could see newspapers that disagree with each other joining together around issues and candidates and parties. And we have to find that structure now.
Do you give much credence to the idea? There's a lot of people on the left, and I mean like not sort of liberals, people on the left, the Ishmael Reeds of the left that say the problem was actually in some ways, quote unquote, woke politics, because we should abandon identity in favor of class. It's a big argument amongst a certain coalition of podcasters, I would say Bernie bros, people, I don't use that phrase, but those types of people who say, we had a guest, Josh Citarella, who self-identifies as a Marxist. He has a very good podcast. We disagree on a lot of things, but he is, none of this stuff, this identity stuff is bad. It's back to class politics. That's how, he didn't say that's how we win, but I've heard a lot of people say that's how we win.
I fear that when people reject identity, they're also rejecting discussion of race. And so that makes me nervous.
It's a type of a discussion about race, I think.
But it's part of it.
Yeah.
Identity also involves LGBTQ people and immigrants and poor people and whatever words we choose to use for any of that. Fine, we can debate that. But I think identity is still important, and all the more so because on the internet, I think one thing the internet does is redefines our notion of local. Local matters in a borough election, sure. But my definition of local today from the internet is people all around the world, people who share my wonky things about book history or topography or whatever interests me. And people find their own definitions of local. Well, that's a community, that's an identity, that's a community that people can come together with. That's a definition of plural society, where you have, back to Hannah Arendt and Kornhauser, a sociologist, who says the problem is when you end up without a pluralistic society, when people don't have competing draws on them. In the old bowling alone argument, it was your church and your school group and whatever else. That was a competing draw when the authoritarian came calling. And that's where norms were created, and that's where people might disapprove of you if you did things that were really crappy. And that is what we potentially lose. That's identity. That's an identity. Identity can take many, many, many flavors.
You can take many flavors, but you don't believe that, I mean, there's a lot of polling and a lot of numbers on this suggest that there are people who thought it went too far. And an example that would be in kind of our universe would be sort of like the Donald McNeil case. The guy who is basically reporting on COVID, an older guy who was fired from the New York Times for saying the N-word in the context of why people say this. He was cleared by the New York Times. It was with a student group. And then it came back in a sort of double jeopardy way because there was a bit of a mania, like we have to snuff all this stuff out because people might get mad at us for having this guy in here who said this, not in a racist way and not with a racist intention. I think examples like that, or, a 13-year-old girl singing Jay-Z lyrics in the car filmed and then gets, a scholarship taken away. Or it's happened to the NHL, a guy who was singing something and get his drafted by an NHL team taken away. That kind of stuff, I think, was a moment in time, sort of like Me Too and then into the BLM stuff. You don't think that had any contributing factor to the way people reacted?
It was exploited.
Yeah,
but I think
but you agree that there are some problems with it.
Anecdotally, sure, there are going to be. There's a wonderful philosopher in Canada named Regina Rini who says that we if I see if I can remember this properly, she said we have the people who want to add words of caution in our language. It's a negotiation of language all the time. Mm-hmm. I can't call a woman a girl now. If I did, I would get properly kicked for it publicly.
Unless she was actually a girl, but yeah.
I said woman, so woman is not a girl, right?
Well,
So we don't do that now. For now, the norm is still the case in recent years, right? So norms change, language changes. So you have that one hand, you have people who want to change language with that sensitivity. On the other hand, she said, are they status quo warriors? How dare you tell me what I cannot say? How dare you do that to me? You don't have any right to do that. You're canceling me, you're woke, all the labels come out. This is a normal negotiation in society. There's all kinds of, Mark Twain wrote in ways that would not be acceptable today, and we have to recognize that cultural context, and culture and context change. I don't think that's the excuse.
Standards?
All of us do.
All of us.
All of us, yeah. But it goes back to this question of it is norms. It
kind of felt like there was an elite that was creating those standards. I mean, we just talked about the idea of Latinx, in which Latino people had never heard of.
Well, right now, you can't dare say DEI, or you're going to have millions of dollars taken away from you. So who's the elite now?
Oh, no.
Who's the censor now?
Oh, it certainly changes. And I mean, this show has been pretty relentless in its criticism of Donald Trump, and the podcast that I do likewise. But because the shoe's on the other foot means that we should attack the shoe now. When it's keep on attacking that one shoe. And yeah, there's a failure of that amongst people who used to. I mean, there's an article in Semaphore from Saturday, which I am in. I'm the first person quoted in it, saying you guys are full of shit because you cared about this stuff and now you no longer care about it.
So you have
I'm with you on that, but I just think the standards that are foisted upon people, and people do get panicky because they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to say the wrong thing because their instinct is, I don't have any ill will. I might, say a word that I mistake. I didn't know it had changed or something, and I don't want to lose my job because of it. That sort of thing.
Well, there's a paradox at work here in that you use the example from the New York Times, right? Well, the Washington Post had a story this week about all woke language and did it go too far? And basically it's trying to put cooties on the word equity. Where the hell are we in this country? We can't use the word equity as if that's somehow a bad word.
But that was a political difference, wasn't it? Saying equity versus equality, those were different. That was a different concept.
So now you're getting your knickers in knots about this. Now,
no, I'm not getting my knickers in knots. I'm just saying, but that...
No, the Post did. I'm saying you're speaking for the Post.
But that's the argument, right? Is that
right.
Equality and equity are different concepts.
So we can go through a Talmudic war about that. At the same time, Joe Kahn, the executive editor of the Times, was interviewed on the podcast with Alan Rusberger, former editor of The Guardian, and Lionel Barber, former editor of the FT. They're not exactly of the same stripe. And Kahn would not say that Trumpists are a cult. He wouldn't use the word authoritarian. So he's got his own kind of, if I may, PC now of a different sort, is that he doesn't want to use certain words that are going to enrage the right. And so we're in the same kind of stupid boat. We're on the ship of fools when it comes to language.
But, I'll give you an example from, I have said cult more times than I say it every time we discuss Donald Trump. I have interacted with his many of his supporters, many of whom I liked, by the way. They were nice people, but they just had a cultish kind of idea about a lot of things. But I don't think it's PC, for instance, for me, unlike you. I know you say the word fascism and fascist. I don't say that. It's because I don't believe it to be fascist in the way that people imply. Now, that's an argument that you and I can have, but it's not a PC thing where I'm stepping. I think I in certain...
Well, in the Times, I'm not saying it is for your case, but it is in the Times case.
Yeah.
My objection here, I'm not saying that the Times has to label it, but if they ignore it, then they can't explain it. Then they can't have that debate.
But
they
would
run
you
away
want the
from
Times to refer to Donald Trump in a news story as a fascist?
I would want to refer to them that some people say he is, and that we have to have that discussion of what fascism is and what authoritarianism is. And what
I feel like we've been having that conversation a lot.
Not in the Times, you're not. Not in the Post, you're not. Not in CNN, you're not. I mean, I've done it on CNN, but that's why I'm not back very often.
Where would you see this happening in the New York Times, for instance? Donald Trump, you think he's a fascist, to be clear.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Where would you see that being aired in the New York Times on the editorial
So the New York
page,
Times will
or-
go out of their way to go to the diners, cliche is true, and they will find Trump supporters and they will do profiles on them. The famous profile was, the Nazi wears khakis and goes to Panera just like we do.
Richard Spencer,
Right.
kind of stuff, yeah. Yeah.
When do they ever go and find leftists, black people, people who would say that he's fascist, and give them fair hearing? I don't see that.
Isn't that their newsroom?
No, you see, there's an interesting issue.
Yeah.
So
I know a lot of people who work there.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
pretty left.
I have a theory there. Jay Rosen, my friend at New York University, brilliant journalism professor, noted in 2018 when the primary support of the New York Times passed from advertising to subscription.
Yeah.
And he said, well, now that the public, the subscribers are the main support, not sole, but main support of the New York Times, that's going to change the relationship of the newsroom to its public, and I wonder what's going to happen. My theory, years on, is that the New York, A.G. Sulzberger talks all the time about independence. And I ask, independent of whom? Of advertisers, sure, politics, sure, but I think they're trying to prove they're independent of their readers. I think the New York Times, every time they piss off the left, they say, see, you don't own us. And that there's a contrarian view there that they want to constantly prove that they're not owned by the libs literally, and that they're willing to piss us off, and that somehow proves something, that proves their independence. So it's a paradox because in the newsroom they may well agree with a lot I'm saying, but they're not going to say it out loud. They're certainly not going to say it in the news accounts, and they're not going to go find the people who are saying this and highlight them as much as they go out of their way to highlight the cultists?
I think it depends on the section of the paper, but I will say this. I don't know that to be true. I'm not as aggressive of a reader of the New York Times as I used to be. And mostly not a political thing, mostly because there's so much to read. But this was always the argument with the Sulzbergers vis-a-vis Israel, was that wanted to not feel like we are Jewish owners of a newspaper, therefore we're going to be harder on Israel. And I'm not saying that's true or not. I have no idea. I've not looked back in how they covered the invasion of Lebanon in 1982 or something. But that was amongst pro-Israel people, that something they said quite frequently, that was like, we really have to make it clear that we're not those people.
And by the way, Arthur was raised Episcopalian. So
Yeah.
I think it was a presumption in New York society, but it wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we would grab somebody to ask Jeff a question.
Or challenge, or debate.
We have
or argue.
we have somebody on the horn. Because if you don't, or if you want to, I have a lot more. I can keep going. Who is it? Mark. Mark, we got you there. You have a question for Jeff Jarvis?
Well, more of an observation.
We'll take an observation.
That's okay.
As long as it's
I
polite.
noted the multiple times that Mr. Jarvis referred to the Dems as we and leftists as us. He's not a media critic. He's a leftist activist. And the sooner we
Can you not be
acknowledge
both?
that fact, we can have a productive conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say this. Our politics are very, very different. But, the reason you have someone like Jeff come on is you want a different perspective. And I know he's a man of the left, but I also know he's a media critic, and I think he can do both.
Yeah, I don't think so, because his critique, he literally said that the problem with the media is they're afraid to alienate the few remaining leftists in their audiences, and that's why they alienate the leftists in their audiences. They don't cater to them. Mm-hmm. And the idea that no one has talked about Trump being a fascist is absolutely insane. And
in the New York Times? In the New York Times?
Yes. The New York Times, the Atlantic, Newsweek. You can find references to Trump being fascist, Trump being Hitler in every mainstream journal. It was the drumbeat of the entire 2024 campaign. But beyond that, every Republican candidate of my 55 years on this planet has been called Hitler by the left and the media, and I understand that's repeating myself. I mean, this idea that somehow the media has any elements of conservatism, not even any remotely moderate views. You go on CNN, Scott Jennings is the closest thing to a true conservative. He's consistently 1 on 5, occasionally 2 on 4, with deranged leftists.
Oh, he handles himself just fine. I've been on with
He
him.
Absolutely does. But why isn't it 3 on 3? Why isn't it ever 4 conservatives?
Last time I was on.
Why isn't it 5 conservatives?
Last time I was on, it was 2 and 2.
It's 4 on 2. Abby Phillips is a creature of the left.
Well, let's let Jeff answer. Well, I mean, I won't even say it's a question. You did actually say it's an observation and a statement. But the idea that the media is absolutely liberal and CNN is absolutely liberal and the thumb is on the scale in all of these places. I mean, if you were to say, take that and make it into a question, I would say, well, let me sharpen it and say that, trying to channel that idea is that it might not be to your liking, but there's certainly not sort of Trump friendly.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they put themselves in this very weird bind where they basically piss off everybody. Yeah. They're pissing off him, they're pissing off me, right? And I don't think that's a great business model. Example, I would say, is Joe Scarborough and Mickey Brzezinski. Right after the election, when they went down to bend knee in Mar-a-Lago, I think that they thought it was a business decision, that they would draw back people, that they would show themselves to be safe, kind of. Instead, it's MSNBC. It's a liberal network, and they pissed off.
Yeah, as a business decision, that was the weirdest thing.
It was a really bad business
decision. But they're still on Trump like white on rice every day, right? I mean, when I watch clips of it, they're not being nice to Donald Trump.
No, but they lost a lot of trust right then. Mm-hmm. And NBC didn't try to be conservative as a whole, as a network. They tried to curry some favor, and it backfired on him.
Are you okay just conceptually with the idea of an MSNBC and a Fox News, a sort of liberal network and a conservative network, much like, The Nation and National Review on TV? Because there was, when Fox News came around, it's not even about a factual thing. It's just like the people were objected to the slogan, "We report, you decide," that kind of thing, which I always thought was Roger Ailes poking you. He's trying to get the attention. But is it okay, just in your idea of what the media should be in Jeff Jarvis's world, that those things exist?
I think that the natural state of media and public discourse is many perspectives expressed. Yes. But then the next question is Fox News a responsible outlet? Is it journalistic? That's where I have problems. I haven't been on MSNBC in a couple of years. I don't know what I said. Maybe this. I went on the show a couple of times and I said, I wish you guys would do a segment called "We Watch Fox News So You Don't Have to." I wish you would show what's being shown there and what's not being shown there.
I think that's called The Daily Show.
And they didn't listen. Well, that's true. So I ended up using some money to fund one of the graduates at CUNY. And Juliet Jeske, you ought to have her on. She does a feature called Decoding Fox News. So she does just that. She watches. And she sees what is on Fox News and what is not presented. To my late father, who was a Fox News watcher until his hearing aid broke, and then that broke his cult membership. I think it's important to hold all of them to account. My issue of late has been, is it worth the effort to pay attention to them, or should we pay attention to the new things? Should we pay attention more to this emerging world? And it's going to be messy. It's absolutely going to be messy. It's not going to be what we expected, where we had a very controlled media ecosystem for half a century, and that control is gone. And I think that's probably okay.
Yeah, as much as I disagree with you on so many political issues, that's why you're here.
Which I respect.
Absolutely bored to death of turning on any of these channels. And I only do it, by the way, when I'm traveling. Like, I just happen to be in a hotel room, like, all right, let's see what's on. And it is this feedback loop of, on the Fox side, which has become very Trumpy. It's also quite funny. You go back to the war on terror stuff, and everyone's supporting the invasion of Iraq. Everybody's supporting FISA courts, whatever it might be. And now the neocons, they're spitting about neocons. I hear this literally on Fox News all the time, so that's pretty surprising to me. MSNBC on the other end, during the first Trump administration, on the Russiagate stuff, and I've talked about this publicly, and I've been very open about how I believed a lot of this stuff, and then I started believing less of it, because I think watching people who got really exercised by it, they just made it bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think, Jeff Gerth's piece in CJR was pretty interesting, that, 85,000 word piece about, okay, well, what's true and what's not. My pal Eli Lake wrote a piece about this, about Donald Trump, called Guilty But Framed, which was a pretty interesting piece about, did a lot of bad stuff, and we can't forget about that stuff, but it was overdone on the MSNBC side. So I think vigilance for both of them are
well. So here's the funny position I find myself in the last few weeks, is that I believe that Rupert Murdoch is the single most malign influence in democracy in the English-speaking world. But here I am now agreeing with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal when they say, "What the hell are you doing with these insane tariffs? What are you doing with an economy that was working?
I know, I'm Paul
Are you
Krugman
knucking futz?"
Yeah.
And so I find myself oddly agreeing with and sharing and doing gift links of Wall Street Journal editorial board things. It's a topsy-turvy world.
Well, it's because they believe in conservatism.
Well, they believe in economy.
And particularly free market conservatism.
Yeah.
It's somebody, I saw a meme today, and you can go find it on Twitter, I don't know where it is, of people, all of Bernie's positions, and it turns out they're all Trump's positions, very similar. And I asked Bernie Sanders about this when I interviewed him, and he had a funny response. He said, "Yeah, well, they are similar in some of these ways, but he's lying." That's what he said about, like, he's a liar and I'm not. And so, all right, do we have one more? Paul? Is Paul there? Hey, Paul in the car.
Stop in the car.
How's it going, buddy?
What's going on? Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. You got a question for Jeff?
Yeah, how's it going, Mr. Jarvis? I had a quick question. So you said that Trump really focused on race, But I found, throughout this discussion, you kind of kept on, focusing on people's, characteristics, like, racial or, I don't know, like being a female. I'm wondering if the faculty loungeification of the Democratic Party put off a lot of regular Americans. I think it's just not how regular people, interact with the world. I deal with people all day, and like the idea that like the Democratic politics are just very, out there. They're not regular people stuff. They're, even the way you were discussing, and not to insult you or anything, but it's very like, left wingy. You know what I'm saying? Like very college professorish, and it's not, like
just be
regular
clear
people
here.
stuff.
I'm a fake college professor. I'm not a real academic. I don't have a PhD. I snuck in through the side door called a journalism school.
So so basically you just have the haughtiness of a professor.
Yeah, exactly. Define regular people. That's the question for you.
The man on the street.
Define that. I think you have an idealized vision of somebody who's not that somebody.
I just say the people I interact with every day, like, people of all races, I'm of the, I'm not wealthy or anything. So I would say regular people. I don't deal with I would say you're kind of like the way, and I'm not trying to insult you, but you just seem like you came off like kind of in a bubble, in my opinion, just with the way the world set you're kind of putting out there is just, I think the way the politics of what you're advocating is going to keep on losing. I'm just telling you.
Now, Paul, I want to add something to this to put to Jeff is that, it's not just Paul, people like Paul. I mean, this is obviously in the Democratic Party. You have James Carville. You said faculty lounge. He was the one that was like, we have to get rid of the ideas and the politics of the faculty lounge to connect with the regular people. So that's something you've heard within the party.
Speaking
too.
to people who are too old and who should be replaced, James Carville.
But it's not like Paul the conservative, or I mean, I don't know what Paul's politics are, but that sense that we have lost touch as a party is not something that's totally alien to the Democratic Party itself. There are people.
Yes. I think there is a losing touch with whom and how is the question. But this goes back to our discussion about identity. I think that I love it when people celebrate their identity, whatever that may be. And there isn't, and never has been, a regular person. There hasn't been a man on the street. There isn't the prototypical American. That's the great myth of mass media. And I think that's the mistake that we made. Well, I was raised in this country. My grandparents, I love them dearly, but they were racist where they were. My parents worked very hard to teach my sister and me a different way to view people. But I was raised in this time in America when we had the myth of the melting pot. And I thought that was an admirable thing for most of my life until I realized at some point that was me, position of privilege, white person saying, someday you're going to be like us and everything's going to be okay. You're going to be regular like us. But we're not going to let you be because you're not like us, because you're black or because you're Latino or because you're whatever. And so people find themselves stuck in that position. So I don't want to be in a position where they're not allowed to celebrate their identity. Let me tell you about something I saw last week on TikTok that I just loved. And it's going to sound a little bit odd, but one woman came on TikTok and she just decreed, black woman decreed, gingers are black, red-haired people are black.
Sure.
And it was a parody moment. It was funny, but people grabbed onto it. And it was amazing to watch for a few reasons. One was that black people were saying, we get to decide who gets labeled black. You don't. We do. I think that was important. Number two is that the redheaded people who were discussed came on and were honored, were grateful. They recognized it as a good thing. And it was a beautiful moment with tons of humor. Okay, gingers, now you can come to the cookout, but don't bring any dishes yet. And it was a moment of people of different experiences and identities in this country coming together on social media in a heartwarming, funny, generous way. That's still possible in this country. But I think it has to be possible from the position that people can say, I'm proud of who I am. And Lord knows the Trumpists are saying, they're proud of being white now. Okay, well, they can be. I don't know what that really means. They've been able to say that for many, many years in this country. Nobody's really been telling them they can't be. That's what they argue that they can't be. Bullshit. But to try to then argue that a black person can't be proud of being black and we have to than kind of go back to trying to hide that in this notion of the mythical melting pot, I think is what got us in this trouble.
Are there people saying you can't be proud to be black? I don't see that.
What
at
is the
all.
whole argument against DEI?
Well, DEI is very particular ideology. I mean, it's do I need to read Angela Davis when I'm working in the shipping department of Amazon or something? I mean, the fact that there's a very ideological core to DEI, I'm not somebody who throws these letters around willy-nilly and say, I think there's a difference between every kind of thing. But, I worked in a media company that took its eye off the ball and went hard in the paint on DEI and similar things at Vice. And
Vice took its eye off the ball in a lot of
in
ways.
a lot of ways, but it became sort of singularly obsessed with this issue. And I just thought it didn't have a place in the way it was being presented. I've written about it. It's not no sense in recapitulating it now.
Right now, the Trump administration is trying to stop the teaching of black history and black culture. That's what's happening. So that's offensive.
So
they're trying to take away money from schools that do, and all kinds of academics are being told to take out words like equity from their proposals.
Yeah, that's stuff I know, and policing language is something that I thought everybody should be against from the beginning, but it's not true that they're saying you can't teach black history at all.
Oh yes,
at all.
Oh yes, departments are being disbanded. It's happening in Florida. It's happening all around. So there are African American studies is a legitimate academic discipline, and it's being quashed in some schools in some states. Yeah, that's what's happening.
Does it all come from? I mean, are these people teaching? I don't know, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell. Is that the argument that there has to be a broader
have their syllabi.
church?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But
isn't the argument not that it can't be taught at all,
No,
but there needs to be a broader church for? Because I mean, you have to acknowledge that a lot of this stuff is very, very political, and I hope you would object to the politics of it if it was coming from the right too. I would. I don't want these places to say like, oh, these academic disciplines are so left wing. Let's make them only Paul Johnson books or something and not Howard Zinn. I mean, the balance of the academy was not something that I ever had. I went to a state school in Massachusetts, and my politics were formed in a lot of ways because it was a political monoculture in every department.
But that's the point, is that you made your own critical judgments based on that, and you were free to do so, and you are yourself, and the school didn't bend your mind. You came out independent.
I'm not bendable, but
right.
There are other people who are bendable.
I think that's no.
I'm a special case, Jeff Jarvis. I am one who's very difficult to tip over. Look, I just think people should have access in the university to a whole palette of
They do. The professors that I know do a good job of challenging students with different perspectives, and just like you, come to their own views. I've had conservative. Truth be told, when I was at CUNY, I wanted to recruit more students from heartland places. I wanted to recruit. I managed to get in a grant proposal to bring in more veterans because we didn't have enough perspectives in the student body. I think that's important. So I agree to that extent.
What about diabetic Irish Americans from Massachusetts? Do you have anyone representing that? I mean,
there you go.
Look at that.
You're all alone.
It's a failure from Jeff Jarvis as the professor. Jeff, we're never going to agree on anything except for the fact, by the way, that liking this book. I mean, on the internet stuff, I think we're more simpatico than on the politics stuff. But Jeff, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
And thank all of you for joining us. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment below. But make it nice. Don't you leave some jerky comments sometimes. Please don't. But make sure to subscribe too. You won't miss an episode, and you can yell at me on time, every time, twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday. And if you'd like to listen on the go, you can get the show in audio form on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are found. But you don't get to look at my beautiful mug and my crappy hair. We will see you when we're back on Thursday. We're on Thursday, right? Thursday, 7 p.m. We'll see you then.